The clerk slid my ID across the counter, and I felt the edge scrape against my palm as I picked it up. At 78, I'd learned to pay attention to small things like that. The weight of a card, the tone in a person's voice, the way a room changes when something isn't right. The bank felt colder than usual, and a quiet unease crawled up my spine as the agent studied his screen longer than normal. Something in his expression shifted and the air around us tightened. That was when the danger began. He leaned a little closer, his voice dropping just enough for only me to hear. "Sir, this transfer wasn't initiated from your device." The words came out carefully, as if he were trying not to alarm me, but they had the opposite effect. They landed heavy, too heavy, and my stomach tightened. I had come here because of strange notifications on my phone, small alerts I didn't recognize. Now they didn't feel like glitches, they felt like warnings. When I turned, I saw my grandson standing a few feet away, his phone tilted in his hand, the screen angled down. His eyes weren't on the floor or on the ceiling, they were locked on me, watching, waiting. That detail hit harder than the agent's whisper. He hadn't come with me inside. He had followed me in after I was already at the counter, and he moved with the kind of speed you only show when you fear someone might say the wrong thing. Before I could respond, he stepped forward with a smoothness I hadn't seen in him before. "It was a system glitch," he said quickly, smiling as if the matter was simple. His voice carried a confidence that didn't match the situation. He kept his phone held close to his side, thumb hovering near the screen like he was ready to act again at any moment. I watched him too, and the look on his face wasn't the look of someone trying to help. It was the look of someone trying to control a moment. The agent lifted his eyes to me again, just a brief flicker, but enough. Concern, confusion, maybe even suspicion. That look confirmed something. He had seen more on the screen than he could comfortably explain out loud. My grandson lightly touched my shoulder, the gesture too quick and too forced to feel caring. "Come on, Grandpa," he said with a practiced calm. "Let's not hold the line." But I stayed still. Something inside me refused to move. What had started as a simple check suddenly felt like stepping into a shadow I hadn't noticed forming, and in that moment one quiet truth settled in my chest. Something was deeply, dangerously wrong. After my wife passed 5 years ago, the house changed in ways I didn't expect. The rooms felt larger, the evenings felt longer, and the quiet pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shift. I managed what I could, but certain things, like the new phones, new apps, new passwords, came slower to me than they once did. That was when my grandson started visiting more often, always with the same line, "Let me help you with the tech stuff." And in the beginning it felt kind. He would sit at my dining table, his fingers moving fast across my screen while I tried to follow from the side. He spoke like he knew everything, and I didn't mind that confidence at first. It reminded me of how young people carry themselves when they think the world is simple. But his help started blending into something else. He began installing apps without asking, changing settings without explaining, and resetting logins while telling me not to worry about the details. I told myself he meant well, but each visit left me understanding less about my own devices. In time, he took over my email, saying he would filter out the junk, so I wouldn't get overwhelmed. He handled my banking app next, insisting the interface was too messy for me. He spoke with a tone that left little room for disagreement. Gentle on the surface, firm underneath. I caught myself stepping back during those moments, letting him take over because arguing felt exhausting. What I didn't see then was how convenience for him slowly replaced independence for me. He began telling me I was too old to manage certain things alone. Sometimes he said it jokingly, sometimes not. He was quick to take the phone from my hand when I tried to handle something myself, and once, when I asked to see the screen while he updated my banking settings, he shifted his body just enough to block my view. I brushed it off as nothing more than a habit. But even then, a faint discomfort settled in my chest, something I couldn't name yet. The first real hint came when he suggested switching my accounts to simplify finances. He said it so casually, like it was a minor adjustment. But something about the speed of his offer made me pause. It didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a plan already formed. Now, standing in that bank lobby with the agent's warning still fresh in my ears, every small moment began lining up in my mind. All the blocked screens, the quick hands, the confident explanations, they weren't random. They were patterns I had been too tired, too trusting to see. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, its light cutting through the dark room. The clock read a little past midnight, a time when nothing good ever arrives. A transfer alert stared back at me. An amount I didn't recognize, sent to a name I'd never seen before. My chest tightened in a quiet, steady way, the kind that comes when you sense trouble long before you understand it. Something was happening without me, and it wasn't an accident. When I asked my grandson about it the next morning, he barely looked up from his phone. He called it pending verification, saying banks sometimes run test transactions. His tone was smooth, practiced, like he'd explained the same story before to someone else. I tried to accept it, but the unease I'd felt at the bank counter returned, stronger this time. I waited until he stepped outside for a call and picked up my phone to check the settings myself. That was when I found it. A linked device listed under my banking app. The name was unfamiliar, the timestamp recent, and the location last accessed was nowhere near my home. A coldness settled along my spine as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate, and it had been happening quietly right under my roof. When he returned, I asked about the device. His reaction came too fast, too certain. He said he authorized it for safety, as if he had done me a favor. He spoke with a thin patience, the kind people use when they expect compliance, not questions. It wasn't just the answer that bothered me. It was the way he delivered it, without a moment of hesitation. Later that afternoon, I called customer service from the porch where he couldn't overhear. The representative lowered her voice when she saw the access logs. She told me gently that the device location didn't match my home or anywhere near it. Her tone carried the same concern the bank agent had shown. A stranger could have forced their way into my accounts, or someone close to me could have used a device I knew nothing about. That thought pressed down on me harder than the midnight alert. When I brought it up again that evening, my grandson grew irritated. His jaw tightened, his answers shortened, and he told me to stop worrying about things I didn't understand. It wasn't frustration, it was fear disguised as annoyance. And that was the moment I began writing down every alert, every change, every odd behavior. The pattern wasn't forming, it had already formed. I was only now choosing to see it. I scheduled a meeting with my longtime financial advisor without telling anyone, especially my grandson. The office felt colder than usual when I walked in, maybe because I already knew I wouldn't like what I was about to learn. He greeted me with the same steady voice he'd used for years, but when I mentioned the strange notifications and the unknown device, his expression shifted into something heavier. He asked for my login times, and I handed him the small notebook I'd started keeping. He scanned the records silently. Then he pointed at the screen. Multiple login attempts had been made after midnight, hours when I was definitely asleep. The timestamps were exact, precise, and they matched the same window when I had received that unexpected transfer alert. A slow current of fear moved through me, quiet but sharp. Someone was entering my accounts when I wasn't awake to notice. He kept looking, clicking through sections I had never bothered to examine before. Then he paused again. His eyes narrowed slightly. Power of attorney forms had been viewed several times from my profile, even though I hadn't searched for anything of the sort. "This isn't typical for you," he said, keeping his tone calm but firm. I didn't need him to explain the risk. Those forms were the kind people used when they wanted control over someone else's future. When I asked the bank to investigate further, they found something else. Several PIN reset attempts had been requested from an outside device, one that didn't match any I owned. The pattern was clear and cold. Whoever was doing this wasn't guessing. They were trying to take over slowly, piece by piece. Later that evening, my grandson appeared in the living room with a stack of documents he called new digital access papers. He said they would make everything easier for both of us. His tone was practiced, the same way it had been at the bank, too smooth to trust. He tried to rush me into signing, brushing past my questions with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. The unease stayed with me long after he left the room. The next day, my neighbor mentioned seeing him carry packages labeled Smart Security into my house earlier that week. I hadn't ordered any, and he certainly hadn't asked me before installing anything. Her voice held a note of concern, the kind people try to hide when they don't want to alarm you too quickly. That was when my suspicion changed shape. It wasn't about mistakes or carelessness anymore. It was a plan, quiet, steady, and designed to make me dependent before I realized what was happening, and I was done ignoring the signs. The call came just after breakfast while I was rinsing my cup at the sink. The bank's verification line sounded calm at first, asking me to confirm a large transfer request. I froze, still holding the cup because I hadn't initiated anything. My voice felt tight as I told them no, absolutely not, and the agent paused long enough for me to hear the weight behind her silence. Something about her tone made the air feel thinner in the kitchen. She asked to verify a few details before continuing. Then she lowered her voice. The transfer, large enough to make my chest feel hollow, had been directed to an external account ending in initials that matched my grandson's, the ones he used for almost everything online. I stood there, gripping the counter until the call ended, unsure whether I felt more shocked or foolish for not seeing it sooner. He walked in minutes later, acting surprised when I asked about the transfer. His explanation came too quickly. "It was just a test, Grandpa. I was checking something." His words were smooth, but the irritation under them was sharp. When I pressed even lightly, his jaw tightened, and he dismissed the whole thing as a misunderstanding I was overthinking. The shift in him was small, but I felt it, the same concealed impatience I had seen at the bank counter, now without the mask. Later that afternoon, a relative messaged me. She had seen something troubling and wanted me to know before things went too far. She forwarded a screenshot. My grandson had told her he was handling my estate early, as if decisions had already been placed in his hands. He wrote it confidently, the way people do when they believe no one will question their authority. I sat with that message longer than I meant to. The room felt heavier. It was one thing to suspect small intrusions, small lies, but this was a future he was preparing without me. One where I no longer made decisions about my own life. That evening, while he thought I was out of earshot, I heard him in the hallway talking under his breath. Once access is permanent, it won't matter. His tone wasn't angry or even rushed. It was certain. Certain in a way that left no space for doubt about what he intended. The shock didn't fade. It settled deeper, colder. And for the first time, fear wasn't abstract. It had direction. It had purpose. It had his fingerprints all over it. He wasn't helping me. He was preparing for a life where I wasn't able to stop him. My advisor called early the next morning and asked me to come in. His tone was steady but carried a weight that made me dress faster than usual. When I arrived, he led me to a private office where a bank fraud specialist waited with a laptop open, notes already on the table. She greeted me politely, but her eyes held the same seriousness I'd heard in the agent's voice the day before. The room felt too quiet as she began reviewing my account activity. She pointed to a list of changes made in the past week. Recovery emails had been edited, then reversed. Phone numbers had been added temporarily, then removed. None of these actions came from my devices. I watched the cursor move across the screen, each line tightening something inside my chest. The specialist kept her voice calm, but there was no softness in the facts she was showing me. She explained patterns she'd seen before, cases where someone close to an older client tried to shift digital control without leaving obvious traces. The steps looked small on paper, but when combined, they created a path toward full access. She paused, then said plainly that someone had attempted to claim digital authority over my account. Hearing it from a professional felt different from suspecting it alone. It was a confirmation I didn't want but needed. The specialist recommended freezing every form of access I had. She printed instructions, walked me through revoking permissions, and helped secure my email and phone. I changed every password with shaking hands, wondering how many times my grandson had stood behind me, watching me type without realizing it. Each reset felt like closing a door I hadn't known was open. She asked if anyone else had been pushing me toward shared management. I didn't answer out loud, but the look I gave was enough. She nodded as if she'd seen that look too many times from men in my position. Before I left, she advised staying alert and keeping everything documented. Her final words were quiet but firm. This isn't accidental. I walked out feeling the kind of alertness that makes every sound sharper. When I stepped into my car, my phone buzzed with a message from my grandson. He wanted to schedule a family money meeting later in the week. He wrote it casually as if it were nothing more than a small discussion about bills. But after what I had seen in that office, the timing felt deliberate, and for the first time I realized he might not be planning to wait much longer. I told my grandson we could review the accounts together, keeping my voice steady so he wouldn't hear what I already knew. He sounded pleased, almost relieved, as if the small performance of agreement meant he had pulled me back into place. I hung up slowly, letting the silence settle before calling my advisor to confirm the plan. He said the fraud specialist would prepare everything. Over the next 2 days, calls from my grandson came one after another. Each one carried a sharper impatience than the last. He asked for passwords, then explanations, then updates on what the bank had told me. I gave him nothing but vague answers, and every time I withheld something, I heard the tension in his breathing. He wanted access, and he wanted it now. A neighbor stopped me outside while taking out her trash. She mentioned hearing my grandson brag on the phone, saying I trusted him too much to check anything he did. She said it casually, not knowing the weight those words carried. I thanked her and walked back inside, feeling a slow heat rise behind my ribs. His confidence wasn't coming from ignorance. It was coming from practice. That night I sat at my dining table and laid out every document, screenshot, and alert I had collected. The logs formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. The linked device, the pine resets, the recovery changes, the late-night attempts. Taken alone, they were small. Together, they told a story even he wouldn't be able to explain away. I organized them in a folder, checking each page twice. The bank arranged a meeting room for the clarification. They didn't call it anything else, but the advisor's eyes told me this wasn't a routine discussion. When I arrived, the room felt colder than usual, as if it knew something heavy was about to unfold. My grandson walked in a minute later with a smirk he didn't bother to hide. He sat across from me, leaning back like someone waiting for applause. He had no idea what waited behind the closed door. The advisor entered with a calm expression, followed by the fraud specialist carrying a sealed folder. They placed everything on the table with quiet precision, each gesture making the room feel smaller. My grandson barely noticed. He was too busy rehearsing control, tapping his fingers on the armrest like the result was already decided. I watched him settle in, confident and dismissive, and I felt the shift inside me. the moment a man stops fearing the truth and starts preparing to put it on the table. My grandson leaned forward, sliding the papers toward me with a grin, saying I should finalize access so everything would be easier. I kept my hand still, letting him believe I might, while signaling the advisor waiting just outside. The door opened quietly, and the fraud specialist stepped in, carrying printed logs and reports. The air felt heavier as she set the papers on the table. She unfolded the documents and began pointing to entries, each one clear and deliberate: login attempts at 3 in the morning, devices I had never owned, attempted transfers flagged by the bank. Every line contradicted his explanations, every timestamp a small indictment of his repeated access. My grandson's smirk faltered slightly, but he tried to cover it with a cough and a shrug. I placed my own folder on the table, opening it slowly so he could see messages from relatives, text threads warning about unusual behavior, and recorded statements that corroborated every concern. The small evidence of curiosity, collected over months, now stood as a mountain of proof. The quiet confidence in the room tightened around him. I watched his eyes flicker between the logs and my face, trying to read the expression I held for months. His voice pitched nervously, claiming stress, deadlines, mistakes. He paused, then, almost inaudible, muttered, "I needed control before someone else took it." The words slipped out before he could recover them, and the room shifted. The realization hit him, and for the first time, his control felt like a fragile veneer. Everyone present leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the truth settle. Family members stared, a mix of shock and disbelief in their eyes, silent as if waiting to see what I would do next. The specialist calmly explained each log, each unauthorized attempt, in a neutral tone that left no room for dispute. The evidence spoke for itself, and his excuses dissolved under its clarity. I watched my grandson fidget, trying to regain composure, but the room held him suspended. The fraud specialist moved with quiet authority, halting any further digital access and officially recording the behavior. Every action she took confirmed what I had feared but could not prove until now. The air felt still, as though even the walls recognized the betrayal exposed. The papers, the devices, the messages, they were no longer abstract concerns. They were proof, and I finally felt the weight of months of suspicion lift slightly, replaced by a grim certainty. The danger had been real, and now it was contained. The fraud specialist returned to the table with a folder of completed forms, her expression neutral but firm. I watched as she filed official reports of elder financial exploitation, each page detailing the unauthorized attempts, the device logs, and the manipulated messages. The weight of months of suspicion settled into a tangible record, giving authority to what had previously been only intuition. My grandson sat across from me, hands fidgeting, eyes darting to the specialist, now stripped of confidence. The bank immediately acted on the findings. Access to my accounts was permanently revoked for him, and every digital credential, every login, every PIN he might have used was changed under dual verification. My advisor added additional safeguards, setting alerts for any attempted unusual activity, ensuring that no single person could move a single transaction without multiple confirmations. The room hummed with quiet efficiency, each action final and deliberate, leaving no openings for error or further deception. Some family members watched from the corner, a mixture of disbelief and cautious silence. A few whispered support for my grandson, claiming perhaps he had only been trying to help, while others made themselves scarce, unwilling to witness what they understood would be exposure and confrontation. I felt the isolation of being targeted by someone I trusted, layered with the relief that systems now protected me. Their whispers, their absence, all underscored the emotional cost of betrayal. I sat back, staring at the new digital locks on the screen, the verification prompts I now controlled, and the physical security of my banking documents. Each measure was a boundary, a wall against intrusion, a reassurance that no manipulation could happen unnoticed. I replayed in my mind the moments leading up to the exposure, the slip of my grandson's words, the security footage, and the emails that revealed intent. Every step confirmed that the threat had been real, and now, finally, it was managed. Grief surfaced quietly, the subtle ache of knowing a family member had attempted to seize control. Yet mingled with it was a measured calm. I felt the beginning of rebuilding, not just my accounts but my independence, my confidence in being able to manage my affairs. The shock that had gripped me the night of discovery had dulled, replaced by deliberate focus. As I left the office, I carried with me a quiet acceptance. The system had moved, consequences had been applied, and my boundaries were now firm. The betrayal remained, but so did the security, and I understood that vigilance, patience, and measured action could reclaim control that almost slipped away. I returned home with the quiet satisfaction of control restored, walking past the familiar rooms with a deliberate attention I hadn't felt in months. Each routine task, checking messages, reviewing account notifications, locking doors, securing devices, was now framed by caution, not convenience. The systems I had set up, once invisible, now felt like extensions of my own will, protecting me from those who might take advantage. The sense of regained independence was subtle but profound, anchored in the deliberate boundaries I had imposed. The lesson of trust lingered in every choice I made. I thought back on the months my grandson's help had seemed harmless, then increasingly intrusive, until the moment I realized that convenience had masked control. Technology, I reflected, was neutral, but it could be wielded to manipulate or conceal intentions. The same devices that had promised simplicity could have stripped me of my autonomy if I had not acted. Awareness, careful monitoring, and deliberate action had become tools as vital as any cane or ledger. I meticulously reviewed my passwords, cross-checked accounts, and confirmed security measures. Each signature, each confirmation, each device was now in my hands alone, layered with redundancy that could not be bypassed. I realized how easily something as intangible as digital access could translate into real-world control, and how essential it was to protect not just the numbers, but the authority they represented. In these small, deliberate acts, I rebuilt a fortress around my life, my assets, and my dignity. Gratitude surfaced quietly, directed at the bank staff and advisor who had recognized the inconsistencies, the subtle manipulations, and acted decisively. They had not only prevented a loss, but had validated the intuition I had fought to understand. Their calm professionalism reinforced the importance of careful observation, measured responses, and documentation, lessons I would carry forward. Even with family, trust could no longer be assumed. I accepted that vigilance was not cynicism but a requirement of survival. Love and familiarity did not guarantee safety. Assumptions could no longer replace verification. I found peace in the knowledge that I had reclaimed authority over my life, that the decisions, the actions, and the consequences were mine alone. I ended the day quietly, reflecting on a single truth: rights and identity are fragile, easily transferred if one is careless or too trusting. Guard them diligently. Once they slip from your hands, the battle to retrieve them may be too late. In every click, every signature, every routine check, I now lived with the calm certainty that I controlled my future, and no one else would.